Ha, ha. Shields and swords, feel the wars, fighting my blood down to the core. Warriors from medieval age, fear the reign of night brigades. Crusades into the room, moving through the temples and tombs. Scared and placed, prepare to face Professor Awesome and the minions of doom. 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 Professor Awesome and the minions of doom.
Hello, minions. So, I really had intended to say nothing about the film Ready Player One because I found the movie just meh. But apparently I am somehow contractually obligated by life to express an opinion because I have been asked for an extended opinion probably at least once, if not 2 or 3 times a day since the film's release. And so I have seen the film twice, even though it was meh, mostly because people who wanted to go see it asked me to go with them, and I went for their company rather than to see the film again. So this will be, I guess, I'm not really reviewing it since my review is meh, all right, I guess, you know. If you want to go see it. I had a student say, hey, should I go see it? It's going to cost me $2. I said, $2? I'd go see it. $5? I don't know. So this is not a review in that sense, but rather more sort of thinking about it a little bit. And this will be full of spoilers. So if you don't want spoilers, I guess don't listen. But let's be honest. As soon as you know the premise of it, you already know every single thing that's going to happen in it. Nothing surprising could possibly happen in this film. And indeed, nothing surprising does. So what I'm going to talk about today is mostly negative things about the film. And when I say meh, I don't mean that the film was unentertaining. And so because I'm saying because almost everything I'm talking about is going to be negative about it, I do want to couch this in saying that I didn't think it was a terrible movie, nor did I think it was a great movie. So it's based on this Ernest Cline book of the same title, which is I think of better quality than the film, because the book itself frankly, the book is no more thoughtful than the film. The film is pretty unthoughtful, but the book is not particularly thoughtful either. So a lot of people have complained about it. At some point, it just breaks down into a string of rememberies. Hey, remember this, remember that. This kind of nostalgic, this kind of pull of nostalgia. But it is compulsively readable. And it does have at its heart an interesting conceit, and that is it's simultaneously set in a dystopian future while continually referencing a kind of 1980s past for nostalgia. And so it operates in this interesting space between nostalgia for the past and the sort of sense of our direction. Interestingly enough, not really a sense that direction is a result of the past and the interest in those past that the past has. You would think there are lots of more thoughtful ways that this conceit could have played out. I think one that would have made a lot of sense would be a kind of dystopian future where you see a very direct line from this past, from John Hughes films, to how a John Hughes film can turn into the nostalgia for that can turn into this kind of dystopian world. How that can go awry. That would have been interesting. He doesn't do that. Ernest Cline doesn't. But it's not great literature. It's the kind of thing that one you can enjoy on a flight or beach reading or this kind of thing. And I would recommend it for that. It's not. You're not going to think deep thoughts about it, and it doesn't really invite you to. I would say if there's someone out there who thinks that they have a really good idea for the same kind of conceit, I would urge you to steal this idea of using the future to talk about the past. Not the future to talk about the present, but the future to talk about the past, and sort of draw a line between the two. All right, so I basically have two complaints. The first one's more of a question. The question is, who is this film for? Like, who exactly is it for? The problem seems to be that the film can't decide if it's for adults or children, and worse, it can't seem to decide if it's for Steven Spielberg or children. And the problem with this is that, Steven Spielberg, Halliday was born, I believe, in 1972, when Steven Spielberg already is, working director at this time. So some of the kinds of things that Halliday would have been enjoying were produced by an adult Steven Spielberg. So Steven Spielberg's about a generation older than the character who's, in essence, focusing us on all of the nostalgia here. And that can be fine, except that Steven Spielberg seems to want us to have nostalgia, a different kind of nostalgia. At the same time, he seems to want this to be a film for children. So the tone of the film, radically vacillates between the two, where you'll have a sort of Goonies-esque, score to the film, and people getting kicked in the crotch, and this kind of level of humor, which is probably fun when you're 12, but when you're a little bit older, it's a little stale. So there's that. But on the other hand, one of the big central pieces, which is this focus on The Shining, which is probably the best of the three keys, Well, The Shining was released in 1980, when Halliday would have been 8 years old. And frankly, the kind of general audience that he's talking to is, in order to have seen this horror film in the theaters, for that to be in your nostalgia, you have to be the age of Steven Spielberg, not the age of the characters, nor even the age of Halliday, who's the old guy in this. And so Steven Spielberg seems to make this about his own particular sense of nostalgia. And so we end up with this sort of weird problem that a lot of the film seems like boring cutscenes from video games where you're just waiting for the movie to continue. The action scenes are not very interesting. The pop culture that's referenced is very often things like Saturday Night Fever. Great. Also a thing which only old people would feel nostalgic for. I'm pushing half a century myself, and Saturday Night Fever is not my jam. It's too old for me, but not for Steven Spielberg. And so, on the one hand, there are a lot of elements in this film which feel like they're aimed at children, while at the same time, the pop culture references that this film chooses to emphasize are way too old for children. And then you get things like, you get the requisite F-bomb in there, the one F-bomb in order to get the film the PG-13 rating, which suggests that they want it to fit into a certain age range. The problem with that marketing to that age range is, if you're old enough to really appreciate what's going on with The Shining, then all the childlike stuff is dumb. And if you're young enough that you still appreciate, the kind of silly score, and characters responding in these other sorts of ways, then you're too young to appreciate the pop culture references that they're talking about. Your grandparents maybe would appreciate them. And And so we end up with this kind of old person's view of what young people are like. So here's a good example. In the film, one of the central points of character development is that, our protagonist doesn't seem to get that on the internet, people are not necessarily who they appear to be. Let's forget for the moment that this is a character who literally is supposed to have grown up in a world completely obsessed with the Oasis, and so clearly must have known this. Every child today knows this. Everyone knows this. The fear today is a fear of loss of privacy, because the fear today is that everyone will know who you are because of the internet. That fear is a 15, 20-year-old fear, maybe. I guess maybe 15-year-old fear that children might give out their personal information, and then someone to find out who they are, that you don't know who they are, and it could be a child predator pretending to be a child. Every child knows this today. They get it today. If we advance another generation, they're definitely going to get it. This is a thing which an old person thinks that young people don't understand, when the problem is it's the old people who have a hard time understanding. It's Steven Spielberg who seems to have trouble remembering, people on the internet might not be who they appear to be. And so it's just sort of, if you're young enough, it should seem ridiculous. Like the titular character maybe has some sort of mental disorder or is incredibly stupid in order to not realize the thing which everybody else gets. And then bizarrely what the film does is they spend the whole time telling you, the worst thing can happen if anyone find out who you are. At the end, Wade gives his speech, and the first thing he says, my real world name is Wade Watts. Well, I thought that was bad. Like, are you telling us that that's bad or that's good? It's still not clear. And I think there's a sense in which maybe we're supposed to be, this is him making himself vulnerable, but even that is not. Again, it's a sense that somehow, even though Ernest Cline sort of worked on the screenplay, it definitely feels like a Spielbergian intrusion into this kind of old person's view of the internet. And then there are other sort of elements, like there's the kind of ridiculousness, which we get also elsewhere, that for example, Wade there's going to be this big battle on Planet Doom, and so Wade has to say Wade has to make this big speech, which is terrible. Not an interesting speech, but he has to give this big speech where he tells everyone to come fight in this big battle. I guess if you've never, ever been in an MMO, you would not realize that you don't have to give a speech. All you have to do is say, big world-breaking battle here, and the servers will all crash, and the frame rate will be, it will be terrible, and you won't be able to get, but 2 bits in per hour, because everybody in the world is going to squeeze onto that location to be part of the big battle. No one needs to be encouraged to do this. It also is weird because they previously set up Planet Doom as this place of constant battle, the most dangerous place, and this place of constant battle. And yet, we see that when Wade's there at first, there's nobody. There's nobody there. It's now suddenly it's empty, even though it's normally just full of constant fighting at all times. And so I think here, in these kinds of conflict I'm talking about, is going to get to my bigger point. The problem of this can't figure out where the nostalgia should be from, like who the nostalgia is for. Is it for kids? Well, if it's for kids, then why isn't there more stuff around, why isn't there more stuff around, I don't know, Hey Arnold or something? If it's for old people, then why do we have all this child stuff in it? I think that gets to the general problem, which is a problem if the book wants to be taken seriously, which is a problem of Arrested Development. It really doesn't seem to be aimed at children or adults seem to be aimed at older people who are perpetually childlike, whose interest in popular culture prevents them from developing and maturing. And weirdly, the film seems to acknowledge this without offering a kind of self-aware solution. And that's my big problem, is the film is unbelievably self-aware. And what do I mean by this? Well, again, we have this idea that Spielberg seems unclear, that the nostalgia, that he's turned this from something about geek culture nostalgia and turned it into something about film nerd nostalgia, which is fine. If you want it to be about film nerddom, that's okay. But then make it about that thing, rather than pretending that, you know what, all the nerds were sitting around talking about? They weren't quoting Monty Python. They weren't playing Joust. You know what they were all doing? They were all watching The Shining. Well, they weren't. That would have been older people. And even then, that was not ever really a part of nerd culture in that same way. And so then we end up with this bizarre disconnect. So, for example, why do we not want the antagonist to take over the Oasis? Someone is going to, so why don't we want the antagonist to? We don't want him to because he's going to sell a lot of ads on it. Yeah, we don't like ads. Again, if you were really marketing, if you were not an old person, and I say this as someone who's got a gray beard. If you're not an old person, you would realize that selling ads is not the problem. That's a 10, 15-year-old problem. Now it would be things like microtransactions. That would be the problem, which the entire world seems built on, in any case. Aside from that, this is in a film which is so replete with product placement that every shot is full of ads. In fact, if this were a smarter film, this would essentially be Steven Spielberg's meta and self-aware confession to the way that he is the villain. Steven Spielberg is the villain in this. Yet, the film seems entirely self-aware. In fact, it has been commented on by many people that the main thing about the actor who plays Wade Watts, who's a kind of cipher, he brings little, if anything, to the role, is that he kind of looks like maybe a young Steven Spielberg would look, and that Steven Spielberg sees himself as the kid. He's not. He is definitely the bad guy in this, which we get to when we get to the end, because the end says, "Hey guys, maybe we should shut down the Oasis on Tuesdays and Thursdays so that people can live real life." Well, then I'm going to issue today a challenge to Steven Spielberg, and to see if you have the courage of your convictions, or if you had any convictions at all in making this film, other than selling ads and making money, the villainous part. I would like you, and you certainly have the power to do this in Hollywood, to make certain that you contractually obligate that your films will never be shown in any theaters on Tuesdays or Thursdays, nor, in fact, will be shown on any theaters that are open on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so that people can go out and live their real life. Or perhaps that's just a bunch of unself-aware claptrap that you use to feel good about yourself, when in fact you don't really understand that you're the villain, Steven Spielberg. You're the bad guy in here. You're the one. You know, it's not everything has to be smart. Not everything has to be wise. And so I intended to leave Ready Player One without comment, because I mean, it's just okay as a movie. It's not that interesting. It doesn't, it doesn't do anything interesting. The problem is that the more you think about it, the more it becomes, the more it should be a confession. But it kind of shows a lack of awareness, a shocking lack of awareness of his place in art for someone who spent his entire career in art. That is really surprising to me. So I guess the end result is, I guess in terms of my recommendation, if you want something fun to read, like chewing bubble gum, read Ready Player One. It's fun. Won't change your life or anything, but it's fun. If you want something entertaining to watch, like I told my student who said she was going to get in for $2. $2 is fine. That's good. If you've got a little extra time, if it eventually comes on streaming or whatever, yeah. But don't go to a lot of effort to see this movie. It's not really worth it. And truthfully, I guess the only thing I would say is refuse to see it on Tuesdays or Thursdays. So, Minions, that's all for today. And, for, I guess, my last instructions to my Minions for this one, just one last announcement. I've been told that a lot of the Minions in my volcanic base have been tossing their trash into the lava. Listen, it does burn it up, but the problem is it makes a terrible smell. Put your trash in the proper receptacles. Do not throw your trash in the lava at the center of the volcanic base. That's all for now.